Welcome back, everyone. My name is Harry Bowell. I'm Exec Director for Land and Nature at the National Trust, and it's been my great privilege to be sponsor from the National Trust part of the partnership for the Future Parks Accelerator. I'm going to be your host for the remainder of the morning. I hope during the break you've had a bit of a chance to look at the Miro board that we put together to accompany this event. It contains more information on all the topics we'll be discussing over the course of the next 3 days. They're going to be available throughout the whole of the conference. So if you haven't already, please do take a look at some point. So I'm lucky enough to be joining you from Sheffield, equidistant from my 2 guests this morning, I think, right in the middle of Edinburgh and London. So I'm lucky enough to be joining you from Sheffield. And if my tech allowed, I'd give you a sneak preview out of my window, where I'm lucky enough to overview one of the wonderful parks in this city. And it's part actually because of where I live in Sheffield, and I've lived here for 20 years. But I passionately believe that sort of high quality nature-rich green space is one of the really big components that underpin a great city. And giving people easy access to it should be a sort of fundamental right to everyone. So have you just seen, last week I had the pleasure of chatting to Andy Street, and apologies if you saw that video of me with a very excited nodding head. I'll try not to do that to our guests this morning. But hearing from Andy about his ambitions for natural infrastructure in the West Midlands city region. So I'm really delighted today to be able to build on that conversation and discuss some of the same issues, same ideas and challenges, but from different perspectives from 2 very different cities. So in this session, we're going to hear from 2 councillors that are leading change in their wards, neighbourhoods and cities. We're going to hear a bit from them, I hope, about why this matters to them personally, the people they represent, and the wider impact it will have on the cities in which they live and work. So I'd really like to introduce and welcome our speakers and panel members. Councillor Amy McNeese-Mechan, if that's correct pronunciation of your surname, Amy, who is from City of Edinburgh. Councillor Anna Wright from the London Borough of Camden. Welcome to you both, and it's really brilliant that you've been able to give us some time today and to be able to share some of your thoughts and wisdom. So if I just do a quick introduction as to what you're both about, and then I'm going to hand over to you. So Amy represents the Leith Walk ward in the City of Edinburgh. She's been councillor since 2017 and has just been re-elected for a 2nd term. Congratulations, Amy. She's a long-standing member of the Culture and Communities Committee, an executive committee with, amongst other things, oversight of parks and countryside in the city. And then Anna represents Highgate on Camden Council, first elected in 2018, and is Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Adult Social Care. Previously, she was Cabinet Member for Promoting Neighbourhoods and Communities. Anna and Amy are elected by residents in 2 of the Future Parks Accelerator places and have both been really great champions for this work in their areas. We'll hear from them both about why they believe investing in natural infrastructure makes sense for their neighbourhoods, wards and cities, as well as what it means to them personally. So both will give a brief presentation, and then we'll have a bit of discussion later on, which I'll share and try and corral. Anna, are you, Amy, can I start with you, please? Tell us a bit about your work in Edinburgh.
Sure. First of all, apologies for the dodgy throat, and can everybody hear me okay, hopefully?
We can hear you really well. What I should have said, one of the delights of our working in partnerships is getting to a tech platform that everyone has access to. Is one of those perennial nightmares. So poor Amy is having to join via her phone because the council doesn't support Zoom. So Amy, that's brilliant that you've been able to join us, and yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Thanks for that. And I should say my background is an anthropologist. I lived in the Far East for 10 years before moving to Scotland about a quarter of a century ago. So that might explain how I'm going to start my talk with the phrase Shinrin-yoku, which is made up of 3 Japanese kanji, which represent forest, trees, and a well to indicate immersion or bathing. Now, I wouldn't usually open a talk in this country with a Japanese phrase, but I have a feeling that our audience today will be very familiar with the concept of forest bathing, which originated in Japan in the 1990s when I lived there, but I'm taking no credit, and the benefits of that for human health. Now, although that was closely tied to the country's nature-based Shinto religion, nowadays, multiple scientific studies have shown the health benefits, both to mind and body, of spending time among trees, from reducing stress and rebalancing adrenaline levels. Time spent walking in woods has been shown, not merely anecdotally, but clinically, to be vital to all of us, even in helping those recovering from addiction. So if you think about it, for our entire evolution as a species, and I'm speaking as an anthropologist here, we have been surrounded by forest. So arguably at present, we're running an uncontrolled experiment on ourselves to see how long we can survive without it. And in fact, so powerful is the effect of nature on us. It's been shown that even watching video of a living forest can help us unwind, which is really helpful for me because I have no green space from my tenement. I can only see a car park. So surrounding myself with houseplants is about the best I can get. Now, various species such as pine and oak give off phytonicides, which appear to benefit us as much as they benefit the plant. And a 2017 study by Yu et al. Demonstrated an increase in beneficial killer cells, which target virally infected cells in the human body. So that's obviously very important for us now. Farrow and Washburn's 2019 study evidenced benefits to the parasympathetic nervous system that allows us to actually properly rest, unwind, digest, and so on. And there was a great study by Hanson, Jones, and Tocchini from the nursing school of the University of San Francisco as well. So what all this means is that the benefits of immersion in nature are no longer just a craze among Zen Buddhists and tree huggers. They are recognized and quantified by scientists. So what does that mean for us? I think everyone here was probably already convinced of the importance of nature, but how do we turn that understanding into policy? Now, currently in Edinburgh, we have 34 Green Flag award-winning parks and 37 fields in trust, with the current initiative to protect an additional 20 spaces. And our aim is that once complete, 85% of our residents will be within a 10-minute walk of a good quality green space. Now, obviously, my ambition is it should be 100%, but we're going to start with small steps. Now, you might think we're doing pretty well, and certainly we're amongst the greenest cities in the UK, but the challenges are nonetheless daunting, with council budgets under increasing pressure. So, can spending on parks be demonstrated to be a canny investment? Now, as the only Scottish local authority to receive Heritage Lottery funding as part of the Future Parks Accelerator project, we were already well aware of the value of our city's urban blue and green spaces and its networks in terms of biodiversity and the physical and mental health benefits of these important places. But now we can map them. We have data. Now, we know we're officially the greenest city in the UK. So yes, we had a fairly fortunate starting point. We have 8 nature reserves and country parks within our boundaries, as well as 39 cemeteries. And we can't forget how important those are in terms of part of those overall provision of green space. And of course, in this city, 5 of our cemeteries are also World Heritage Sites. And one of the wonderful things that we have are nature capture cameras in some of those, so you can see the badgers and the deer and so on. There are 100 school grounds in Edinburgh of varying sizes, over 200 local play parks. And in 2018, we resolved to become a million tree city. Now, already we stand at about 620,000 trees. Obviously, we lost some due to ash dieback, and I'm sure some of us will be wanting to talk about how we diversify better in terms of our planting. But our planting program now is focusing on native species, as well as, and this is a particular favorite of mine, planting living Christmas trees in the many local shopping and retail centers around the city where they used to get a cut tree every December. Now, the Future Parks Accelerator funding also allowed us to put greater focus on the ecosystem services provided by these green oases within the urban environment. As a cultural anthropologist, I'll always argue for the importance of intangible benefits, not only in terms of providing a place for contemplation and relaxation and a low-cost means of exercise, but also a locus for socializing, a place where team building skills are developed through sport or community gardening. Now, when we're arguing for investment in difficult times, we can point to the importance of preventative spend in terms of young people's cognitive development and mental health, particularly important after these past 2 years, but also older people's socializing and exercise opportunities. These are excellent reasons to invest in parks. And the COVID-19 pandemic brought into starker focus the inequalities of access to open green space, as well as their vital necessity. So I'm one of the most densely populated urban areas in Scotland. We have a lot of tenemental properties like mine, and we need that access to public green spaces for those who don't have the benefit of a private garden. So here's the thing, for those who hold the financial purse strings, it's those big numbers, I believe, around ecosystem services that sometimes will change their minds. So we've looked at flood risk mitigation, which protects homes, businesses, schools, and the public purse from expensive emergency efforts, insurance claims, rebuild costs. That's just one example. In some cities, heat is the #1 challenge. I would say at the moment, excessive rainfall is something that we've experienced. But we've been able now to demonstrate Edinburgh's green spaces provide us with £174 million of services. So with those, for those with a background in public health, the provision also of clean air and the benefits of that is clear, and it's vitally important to children in particular because of their vulnerability to particulates in the air, but also tackling respiratory illness in our elderly population. So the renewed focus on the urgency of tackling climate change also brings our parks and green spaces right into that front line of battle to reach net zero, which is our aim in the city of Edinburgh to reach by the year 2030. So being able to put data, put figures about the amount of oxygen produced by 1 hectare of wooded area, and even on the differential health outcomes of those with daily access to open green space versus those who are denied access due to poverty, neighborhood amenity, or mobility issues. This type of data is what is needed to convince decision makers that we cannot afford not to invest in parks. Our 2050 vision emerging out of this is that green spaces will be at the heart of our communities and help make Edinburgh an outstanding city for well-being, quality of life, and heritage. And well-being is one of those words I use a lot, and it feels like 5 years ago, nobody could exactly put their finger on what that is. I think, again, coming out of the past couple of years, people are much more aware of what that actually entails. So from allotments to gardens, parks, to playing fields, orchards, and meadows, we've been rewilding some of our parks, to woodlands along the shoreline and our riverbanks, which we call our blue spaces. Quality blue-green space that works for people as well as wildlife that we share our city with. Now that here in Edinburgh is deer and foxes, badgers, otters, squirrels, kingfishers, butterflies, bees. this kind of high quality space that works for everything is part of the longer term vision. And in fact, I would say that our key aims for our urban green spaces are also those that we want for our city's people, that they be connected, that they be thriving, that they be valued, and that they be resourced. So our future Parks Accelerator funding allowed us to build a model of green space services that over the next 30 years, in partnership with communities, volunteers, the public and private sectors, can deliver on our aspirations for health and sustainability, biodiversity, and placemaking, and enable that holistic, evidence-based approach to investment and resourcing. So, open for questions.
Amy, that's brilliant. I'll come to questions when I've heard from when we've heard from Anna as well. But just a couple of reflections from what I thought was a lovely presentation that took us from forest bathing in Japan through to some of the practical realities in Edinburgh. So yeah, just a couple of things. I mean, one, actually, joking aside, actually, we've already heard today from some inspiration that we can take from places elsewhere. I really love that idea of just pulling in expertise and brilliance and global thinking, but making it local. So that's brilliant, isn't it? And then just the second thing is the whole thing around evidence, and in particular the evidence of just the power of parks that cross-cuts health, flooding. It's clearly a really important thing that I might come back to in discussion. So thanks so much, Amy, really, really helpful. And are you okay if I pass to you now and you give us a bit of a whistle-stop whirlwind tour of all the brilliant work you're doing in Camden?
Yeah, thanks. I've unmuted myself, you can hear me, yeah? So hello, yes, I'm Anna. As introduced, I'm Camden's Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Adult Social Care. And thanks ever so much for having me. I haven't got any slides. I'm just going to speak as Amy did. So I was born and bred in Camden in central London, highly urban, densely populated area. And throughout my childhood, every Sunday afternoon, my mum would make us all go for a walk on Hampstead Heath. And I would drag my feet on the walk there, eyes to the ground, complaining. But as that green space opened up before me, my focus would expand and I'd be captivated by a falling leaf or the sort of dash of a squirrel or the temptation to chase my brothers with a stick. And reflecting back now, I recognise that the access I had to that green space was one of the greatest privileges of my childhood. And I think it's quite extraordinary to note that before 1840, there were no public parks in England. I mean, in London, you could find sort of expensive pleasure gardens and private estates, but no free to enter public green spaces with access for all. And then, of course, increasing urbanisation during the 19th century led to cities expanding. London became the largest city on earth, but poorer citizens were living in cramped and unsanitary housing. And in those cities, people became increasingly detached from the natural world. And activists recognised the physical and psychological impact of this effect. And they began to campaign for public green spaces in direct response to public health needs. And I think it's really kind of interesting and easy to overlook that some of our great radical predecessors were actually focusing their campaigning energy on a fight for parks. So in Camden today, we're building upon that legacy. Now, Camden's housing, although by no means perfect, is certainly much improved on the 19th century, but nearly 2 in 5 of Camden homes don't have access to any private outdoor space, and that's the 3rd highest in the country, 3rd lowest, whatever. So our parks really are acting as gardens for people who don't have one. And a few years ago, I was involved in a research project with Age UK to explore the types of social infrastructure drawn on by older Bangladeshi residents aged over 50. It was a nationwide project looking at other things too, but I was just doing the Camden bit and this was the focus. And our research cohort of Bangladeshi residents who were all aged over 50, they kept a 2-week log of everywhere they visited. And Camden's parks and open spaces were the most noted as visited, equalled only by the mosque. And when asked why they visited the green spaces, most of the participants did cite the general health benefits, a sense of feeling better, alongside the social connections, albeit those were very sort of fleeting and passing by. But these results were really interesting to us because I think in efforts to sort of encourage wider usage of green space, it seems even just those few years back, people might have been making some incorrect assumptions that older Bangladeshi citizens were not regular users of green space. Their usage was perhaps going somewhat unnoticed. And this was pre-COVID. And then the pandemic, of course, saw an explosion in use of our green spaces, much larger numbers of far more diverse communities starting to value, but importantly, exercise their entitlement to make use of our parks. And it also, of course, revealed some of the barriers and challenges for some potential park users. For example, lack of toilet facilities and absence of supervision, and the extent to which a lot of people are put off by dogs came through as a big one. But nevertheless, the growth in use of open space during the pandemic has been a game changer for Camden. And we are now understanding much better the health benefits, the environmental benefits, and indeed the economic benefits. And this has begun to change the political positioning of parks across our agenda. And in a small demonstration of that, I mean, I'm the cabinet member for health, wellbeing and adult social care. And our green spaces work is seen as much to be a priority for me as it is for our cabinet member who leads on the environment, or our cabinet member who leads on sport and leisure, for example. And as has been spoken about by Amy already, we now have facts and figures. We have evidence that access to high quality parks and green spaces is associated with better health outcomes overall. There's a figure that regular use of green spaces is associated with a 43% lower risk of poor general health. Now, we need to remember this is association, not correlation, because we do know that people who use green spaces are likely to share other characteristics associated with better health. But there's no doubt now that access to parks is associated with increased physical activity, low likelihood of being overweight, and very importantly, improved mental health and resilience. So we do now really recognise and have evidence of the benefits. So what are the challenges to really maximising the opportunities offered by open space for improvements in health and wellbeing, my particular area? Well, first, I would say you need everyone pointing in the same direction. The political commitment needs to be enshrined and expressed coherently in policy. And in Camden, we do have now an extensive policy framework that supports investing in green spaces. We've got our overall strategy for the borough, which we call We Make Camden, and that was developed through deep engagement with our citizens, including through citizens' assemblies, both around health and around the environment. And the policy asserts the borough's focus that Camden should be a green, clean, vibrant, accessible and sustainable place with everyone empowered to contribute. Our public health and adult social care work holds a constant focus on tackling health inequalities and on prevention, with recognition of the role of green social prescribing. And we've got an ambitious transport strategy, which is hardwired into our ambition to cut carbon, improve air quality and enhance public realm. We've got strong local planning policies that demand and protect green space. And our officers work across sectors to progress our green space ambitions. Finding resource, again, Amy and Harry have already referenced this, is a huge challenge for all local authorities. Camden's faced huge cuts in central government funding over recent years, and we've got more savings to find even before any other fiscal events today or this month. But we've argued strongly that we invest to save, and we're strategic about our investment. We recently, as part of our Parks for Health Future Parks Accelerator supported programme, we undertook some detailed accounting work, which illustrated that green spaces provide a 1 to 12 return on investment, with each visit providing £7 worth of benefit for physical health and £13 worth of benefit for mental health. And that's absolutely extraordinary. And we've placed a strong focus on partnership because we cannot achieve what we want alone. And here, the big shout out to the Future Parks Accelerator programme, who've been our wonderful partners and supporters through our Parks for Health programme, which we launched just a few months ago. And it was the result of 3 years of work. The strategy was developed in partnership by teams from Camden and our neighbouring Islington Council, but also with a large number of community partners, including 36 Friends and Parks user groups, over 50 voluntary and community sector organisations, and I think it ended up being up to 12 GP practices, as well as strategic partners. So the strategy really is a shared vision and a shared endeavour. And as a result, I'm confident that we will be able to deliver on its ambition through ongoing collaborations with funders, strategic partners, VCS, health providers, but right through to individual citizens. And getting our individual citizens involved is a priority for Camden. I believe we've been at the forefront as a local authority of new ways of engaging with our citizens. I've already mentioned our citizens' assemblies, and in fact we held Britain's first ever citizens' assembly on the climate crisis. And at the other end of the spectrum, just as a little example, we provide a lot of small-scale grants to individual citizens, so they don't have to be a registered charity, they don't have to write a complicated fundraising bid. Anybody who wants to lead a local initiative, for example, on their estate, and these have included things like vegetable growing on estates and temporary gardens in rubble skips and things like that. But when it comes to green space for us, there are the real hard realities of being an inner London borough. So we're highly populated, very densely built up area. And as a local authority, we manage 68 green spaces, but these are generally pretty small. And they include playgrounds, churchyards, and the open areas within our public housing estates. We've also, of course, got Hampstead Heath and Regent's Park within Camden, but these are not under our direct control. So good working relationships with the Royal Parks and the City of London Corporation are really essential here. But we do need in Camden to look at how to protect and also expand every inch of green space wherever we can out of very constrained pockets of land and hotly contested, because the land values are so high where we are and the pressures on housing and workspace development are enormous. But where there's a will, there's a way. And this is the point where I do wish I'd been organised enough to think to show you a photograph, because one of our success stories this year is the creation of an entirely new park, which was formerly a road right in the heart of the West End, just off Tottenham Court Road. And it's called Alfred Place Gardens. It opened this spring, and do take a look if you can. You can Google it, or I can send a link or something. But this former road is now a stunning new park. And you can imagine, I'm sure, some of the challenges and objections and complaints that we had over the period of transformation and the disruption, but the end result is a resounding success. And this was part of a joined up scheme through which we invested 35 million in improving the Camden bit of the West End. So there was traffic and road redesign, improvements in public realm, all sorts of other interventions, all in a kind of joined up way right across that patch. And we're looking at every other spot where we might be able to create new green space in small road intersections, for example, as part of our Healthy Schools road closures, which also form part of our transport and our carbon reduction strategies, or pocket parks, or anything we can do with our communities on our estates. And lastly, I guess I would say this because we politicians always like to feel that we have a role to play. But I do believe political commitment and leadership are really important. If you haven't got political leaders who already recognise the value of parks and open spaces, then get them on board, or find some different ones who do. And on that note, I will close and thank you for listening.
Well, that was brilliant. And just before I turn this to questions, just a couple of things I've pulled out of there. So one is I love the starting with the history lesson, and it feels to me as if we probably never needed parks as much as we have now, particularly post-COVID. But just it feels as real to us as National Trust as it did 127 years ago when Octavia Hill was campaigning to save such places in London. But the second, and we touched on this in the presentation of Paris, is that whole thing about integration, not seeing parks as a as a thing in isolation, but actually looking at how it can be woven into the strategy for the much wider strategy for a place, and make the place much more livable and healthy and vibrant. And we'll be hearing more about that, obviously, as the days unfold, in particular, I think, through Plymouth. And then I think what you ended on is absolutely, I just absolutely echo that we from an FPA perspective would say political leadership is a massive ingredient in making this work happen. And so I'll say, well, thank you both for the leadership that you brought to this, and that it clearly will have a ripple effect into the politics of the place where you both work. So I'm going to just turn to a few questions now, and I think Victoria, we've had at least one from the audience, but I'll start with one which kind of you touched on in your forest bathing illustration, Amy. But can I ask you both just to think about, apart from the places which you're obviously working in and taking inspiration from, but where in the UK or worldwide have most inspired you when it comes to prioritising accessible urban nature? If you give me just a one place answer, I'll come to you first, Anna.
Well, you know what, I've spent quite a bit of time in Bangladesh, and I was working with some young people in the capital there, Dhaka, many years ago now. And one of these lads who was, faced all the challenges of a young, poor person living on the streets of Dhaka. He had, in his little flat that he lived with his very large family in a very tall block, he found a way of getting up onto the roof, and he'd got pots of plants, and he'd got a rose bush which he adored and loved. And we realised, because we kept in touch and exchanged photographs, that the breed of rose he had in his pot on his roof was the same as the one I had in London, in Camden, in my little garden, and it was called Double Delight, a yellow rose. And so we shared the progress of our Double Delight roses. But in a city, I don't know if others have been to Dhaka, but it's hugely populated and built up and very deprived. With some wonderful progressive stuff going on there. But to have created a green little oasis of space where he was able to enjoy watching his rose bloom on the roof of this block was quite inspiring to me.
So it couldn't be a better name, could it? Double Delight. I think that's fantastic. That's delightful. Amy, can I come to you?
Oh, it's going to be hard for me to narrow it down, but I actually think my very first memory of trees as a baby were the sequoias. My parents moved our family from Oregon to San Francisco, and we drove down, and it seems like that's the earliest visual memory I have of these immense things that were, living creatures that were so much bigger and older than we are. So yeah, but it goes from that scale right down to living in a big city like Osaka, where everyone has their little pots of plants kind of outside. And if you get high enough up on a building, you'll see that the tops of many of the buildings have a garden. And the reason for that is that the Shinto shrine that was once there when it was open country is that the idea is, if you build a building, you have to move the shrine up. You can't deprive the Shinto gods of their place to live. So you have to move the garden vertically. So if you get to a high enough building, you'll look down and you see all these little green rooftops. So I like to think that we're really moving forward with green rooftops here. But actually they've had them in big cities like Tokyo and Osaka for some time. Maybe more for religious reasons than for health reasons, as it were, but I like to look around for those kinds of inspiration. So thank you also for those films from Medellin and Melbourne, because
fantastic.
Exciting, really exciting stuff.
Thank you. So I think we need a new rose called Triple Delight. For me, it would be Copenhagen, actually, I think, is one of places which is really planning on a long horizon and doing some brilliant work. So thank you. Victoria, I'm gonna, because I'm very mindful of time and lunch is upon us. I think we've got at least one question from the audience. Should we take that question, if that's right?
We have, yeah. We've got a question for Amy, which is, how do you wild a city like Edinburgh? How wild is wild?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as I say, I think we've started out from the fortunate space of being already quite green. What we've been trying to do as a local authority is convert a lot of lovely manicured grass into meadow, and and keep those with native flower species, keep them unmowed. And that's been a political challenge, because people will then come along and say, oh, you're just not bothering to mow the grass. And so, getting that message out there of how important it is to species like butterflies and bees in particular. And we've got quite a few of our buildings now have hives. They've invested in beehives. But one of the things that one of the apiarists, beekeepers said to me was, we can't just build hives, we need to provide the food for the bees. So we need to provide more meadows in those kind of urban spaces with flower species that the pollinators can use.
Brilliant, thank you. Joke, I'm going to make a really stupid joke, which is I've had a few wild nights out in Edinburgh in my time, but that's a different thing. I'm going to bring us to a close, but before I do, Anna, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your passion, your personal passion, and great political leadership that you're bringing to this. I'm sure that both places are much the richer for that input. So thank you for joining us. We're going to break for lunch now. I think that's been, certainly from my perspective, that's been a really interesting morning, covering the global and the local, which of course is probably going to be a theme of this conference. I see there's some questions already beginning to appear in the chat. Victoria, I'm guessing that we'll scoop those up and think about how we play those back as
we'll try and answer them in writing or direct them to various other parts of the agenda.
Brilliant. Okay, so nice lunchtime now. We're going to be back at 13:25 sharp, where our afternoon keynote is Renee Olivieri, our very own newish chair of the National Trust, who's been a huge advocate for this work. And before he came to the trust, he was a trustee of the lottery fund, so he sort of spanned both sides of the partnership, and has huge passion and energy for this. So we'll be resharing all the links to the Miro board and the programme. But until then, have a lovely lunchtime, and thanks once again, Amy, and for joining us. See you after lunch.
Thank you.